Hello, everyone. Welcome. All right, we are getting people pouring in. I'm going to go ahead and get started with some of my introductions. Welcome to today's workshop, Pioneering Sustainable Learning, a Net Positive Energy Campus. My name is Miranda Wright, and I'm the Education and Engagement Manager at Illinois Green Alliance. You've all been muted upon entry, so please type any questions you have into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get them answered towards the end. This webinar is also being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up email. For those of you unfamiliar, Illinois Green Alliance is a member-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through educational events such as today, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. This webinar is approved through AIA for 1 LU HSW credit and can be logged for 1 LEED AP or Green Associate CE hour. Certificates of completion for both AIA members and non-AIA members are available upon request. To request your AIA CE credit and/or a personalized certification of completion for architecture license CE reporting purposes, follow the QR code on your screen and complete the linked form. I'll also be linking the form in the chat now and at the end of the session. For those interested in self-reporting CE hours for your LEED AP or LEED Green Associate credits, we'll be following up in the follow-up email with self-reporting instructions for that. Here are today's AIA learning objectives. And then I also want to take a moment to recognize Illinois Green Alliance's sustaining sponsors who make our work possible. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, USGBC, and Sloan. And now on to the main event. We have a great lineup of project team today for today's program, starting with Angel Valtierra, is an associate at SMNGA Ltd. He was the project manager, project architect for AGC. He handled the day-to-day coordination while overseeing the construction documents and administration for the project. Next is Todd Niemiec, is a principal for SMNG. Todd served as project architect and team lead for AGC with a focus on building, programming, planning, code, and zoning compliance responsibilities. Then we have Lynn Sciarra, principal for FAR Associates. Lynn served as associate architect leading sustainability activities and detailing of the exterior building envelope. And last but not least is Sachin Anand, principal with DBHMS. Sachin served as the lead building systems engineer for AGC with a focus on building performance modeling, system design, and thermal comfort design. Now I'm going to pass it over to our speakers to get started. There you go.
There we go. Well, okay, I think we've got it now. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Todd Niemiec. I'll just give you a brief overview. I guess I'll give a brief overview on the project. Living Building Challenge aside, this is a very complex program. And so it involves a reuse of a former LeClaire Courts, Chicago Housing Authority property. It's the first property that's being redeveloped since CHA has moved out of the site, and it's going to be more actively supported by housing, grocery stores, and other things. So this is the first construction on the site in the far west end. If you know Midway Airport in Chicago on the west side, it's north of that, just near the Interstate 55. It's a 6.5 acre site. This is the first building. It's on the far south end of the property, and it will be supported by a 3-acre farm to the north of it. So we located the building to the south to create that open space. It's a school, but it's more than a school. It's a complex and integrated program that includes it really is challenging conventional educational models. It has pre-K through 8. It has a community center, which is also has teaching kitchens in it. We have an outpatient community-based healthcare center and a fresh food market and cafe. The AGC has an aspirational goal for getting students to spend at least 30% of their time outside of the building and learn from the inside and outside. So accordingly, the environment and the building are used and developed intentionally as teaching tools. There was a very iterative process with a large stakeholder group to make this happen. The programs align highly with community support focus. So they feature community-based outpatient healthcare center, as I mentioned, community gardens, a fresh food market, and the community hall, which does offer adult education after hours for cooking and things like that. Programming was finalized through an extensive and broad-based stakeholder engagement process.
Okay, so as the project went through a couple design iterations, very quickly, and part of the AGC mission was to do a super sustainable building. And as everybody on the call knows, well, what's sustainability? And is it a LEED building? Is it a Green Globes building? Is it a Phius building? Is it a zero energy building? So the team ultimately landed on Living Building Challenge as, the most aspirational. And we're like, can we do it? We're like, well, we think we can. And we had the land, so that made it like a little easier. And there was some ComEd community grant to help with some of the PVs on that. So kind of all the pieces fell together. And we put a stake in the ground and said living building. And we're well on our way. We have submitted, so we'll see on that. Next slide. All right. So Todd talked a lot about community engagement and front end work and the Cultivate Collective Academy for Global Citizenship. They've got their hands, a lot of partners. It's a very complicated capital stack. So Aaron Carbonari helped put that together. There was a lot of community engagement on the front end that helped because as part of living building, there's a whole chunk of equity and inclusion that you need to document and you need to engage in the process. And so luckily, AGC that was all what they do. They're into it. And so it was sort of easy to sort of go through all that. On the construction side, we have your typical, it was a design bid build. And so sort of, Todd's team had the construction at the building, but then there was a kitchen consultant and furniture consultants and permits and graphics was a different group of people. So there was a lot of other people. So as the sustainability integrator, we had to get information from all these people. And then of course, power and the subcontractors. So there's just a lot of people involved and there was a lot of information flowing back and forth. And I think part of this presentation is about what we would have done differently. We would have had a way better collaborative portal for information. I think that is because there's so much information that has to flow back and forth between so many people. And we were doing it via email, which is fine, but it's just having a more comprehensive collaborative portal where we could have exchanged information would have been super helpful. Next slide.
I think it's worth mentioning that this was built during the pandemic. So we did have challenges with being in person and communication. So, but also with construction and, long lead items and supply chain disruptions. So it was very critical at the very beginning to have everybody at the table, not bring people on as we went. So we needed the benefit of everybody's perspective on things, including the contractor. So the contract here was pre-construction services leading to a GMP, and all the subs were bid out competitively. So it was a qualifications-based selection at the front end. If we didn't have the GC at the front, it would have changed the whole, it would not have made this easy, or I'm not sure if it worked at all.
Right. Yeah, good point. Next slide. All right, so Todd alluded a little bit to the site, or Angel, do you want to talk about the site?
Yeah, for the site, as Todd mentioned, it's in Chicago, Illinois, on the southwest side near Midway. So we're just north of Midway, in the flight path, surrounded by residential. As mentioned, it was a former LeClaire Courts residence, but those were all torn down in the 2000s, and the site had remained vacant. The point of we're not going to go through every petal and every imperative, as there's 7 petals, 20 imperatives, but we just kind of want to highlight a few things about the plates petal. We did, as Len mentioned, we do need a open site or a site to be able to house a few things that support the program and the livability challenge in terms of just supporting its users and making a better environment for everybody. So zooming in on the site itself, it automatically lands itself to the place because it's not a green site. So we're kind of rejuvenating the site with an urban farm that can support the school and the community. We have the PV to the right side of the page. We have the PV. So we couldn't fit all of the PV on the roof, so we had the land and the space to put the PV. As we're going clockwise, the training hub environmental center, that's part of phase 2 programming. And then just south of that, there's the community plaza next to the community hall. As Todd mentioned, the Esperanza Health Center on the southwest corner or bottom left corner for everybody. And then, other programming needs, we have covered bike parking, which is unique to the project, but that also lended us another surface for the PV. So as Todd mentioned, the curriculum requires them to be outside 30% of the day. So that lended a helpful hand in terms of meeting the other imperatives where habitat exchange. They're doing a lot of community service outside of their site. They're giving back to the earth. And then human scale, we're not imposing on any other surrounding sites. So that helped us as well. So location was a key factor for achieving this petal.
And one thing on this, because this is the only time you really see this, is the geothermal array is about the size of four of those hoop houses. So that's pretty much, so it's a pretty big, it's 50 wells, and it's a pretty big chunk of area. And we decided not to put it under the building because we had the land. But just so you get a scale, to heat and cool this building, we needed about half the footprint of the building to do it. And we'll get into that in a minute. So Sachin, I'm not going to steal your thunder. Okay. Oh, wasn't there another place pedal? Okay, well, we're going into water now.
No, I skipped those ones.
Got it. All right, cool.
So Len, you want to kind of team up with me on this water pedal so we can talk through this real quick? Yeah.
Love it, because that little Department of Buildings is mine.
Yes, it is. And really, I think what we want to talk about here, and you heard Len mention it earlier, is some of the lessons learned. What went better than expected, and what was a challenge. We're not trying to kind of walk you through how to design an LBC building. I think a lot of folks who are listening to us today probably already know that. We're trying to share our lessons learned, and I think on the water side, as you know, we need to be at net zero water, and we went through an entire process, and Len really kind of spearheaded that. So I'll let him chime in here, and in terms of working that through with the Department of Buildings.
So obviously the first stumbling block is that they won't let us use the water for drinking. So and they were even really nervous about the toilets. And I'm sure everyone has heard the story about, oh, what if they drink water out of the toilets? You got way bigger issues if you're drinking out of the toilets. But we sort of got through that, and we got through the who's gonna inspect the system, because it's kind of a state thing versus a city thing, and they were like all hands off. But eventually we got everyone together. Again, this was also during the pandemic, so we couldn't meet with anybody, and it was like brutal getting a hold of anybody in the city. But some of the things that we would do, we kind of forgot, oh, well, what happens if the cistern freezes? Okay, we got to have a heater. All right, Sachin, I need a heater because it's going to freeze, right? We kind of thought about it, but we didn't totally get it. We got the roof right, so all the drainage, we got all the pipes. And then one of the other struggles is tying the water system into the building management system. I mean, it's like like if you guys have ever done, building controls, everybody's got their thing, and like tying them all together is like super hard. And the water people, they're like not quite in the dark ages, but they're not quite where, the air handler people are. And so, getting all the data from the cistern to tie into the building management system so we can control it, it's just that was a struggle that I think, again, had we known now what we knew then, if we know then what we know now, we would have been a little bit more on top of the controls. The control systems themselves are pretty good. We've got our air gaps. We've got I don't know how many RPZ valves. This building has RPZ valves everywhere. And we got our day tank, we got our skid. We had plenty of room in the mechanical room for the plumbing. We allowed for that. We didn't exactly know how big the system was going to be, but it's all worked out, and it's all accessible. So, I mean, planning wise, we knew all the pieces, but bringing it together was like a little bit of okay, now we know what to do next time. And then here's just a schematic of
Yeah, the one thing I would mention here, just in passing, is that if you haven't done a rainwater harvesting or a stormwater harvesting system, it's not very complicated. It looks complicated on this. We've done it several times on projects, and these days, you have folks who will provide you a skid-mounted system. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Talk with one of those providers. They will work with you. And like Len said, the key is how it integrates with the plumbing and the controls and the electrical and the energy piece of it. I think that's the place where you need to pay attention to, or rather than the inner workings of this system. That would be my advice, and that's to folks who want to incorporate a rainwater harvesting system on their project.
And no standing water. You've got to be recirculating your water. So, with the day tank, you've got to be recirculating the water. The cistern, you got to be agitating the water. Like, the city really doesn't like water just sitting around. It's always got to be moving. So there's a lot of like, oh yeah, we need another pump to like circulate the water, but a float switch to tell when we need. There's circulate. Yeah, that's the lesson here. Circulate the water. Next.
I think one thing too, and maybe you can speak more, the advocating to the state, how we had to go to the state level for this to get passed.
Well, again, this is a city. Like, the city was like, rainwater, that is not our gig. Like, I don't want to. They don't want to touch this. The city of Chicago doesn't want to touch rainwater. They're perfectly happy to push it off to the state. And of course, there's one guy in the state. So, but I have a cell phone number. So, yeah. So, but eventually we got them together, and the city was happy. The state was happy, and we're flushing the toilets. Just don't drink the water from the toilets. The other big piece about the water, at least in the living building, is that we were able to use the stormwater as because we have a combined sewer overflow. We were able to use the fact that we have a superior stormwater management system. We were able to sort of reduce our release into the combined sewer. So within this context of a living building in Chicago with a combined sewer, we were able to use the stormwater and the potable water and combine those, because the ultimate outflow to the system is in the combined sewer. And we were very fortunate. One, we had a lot of land, and two, we had a really nice sand seam. So once we punch into the sand seam, we're able to absorb 100% of all the stormwater. So we were kind of fortunate, a lucky accident, and it allowed us to sort of make the net zero water thing go, because we are releasing water into the sewer. We don't have a black water system. There's some exceptions there. So it's net zero water, but it's net zero water when you count the storm water.
So talking about the energy, and folks, probably know this on when you're designing a high performance building, it's important to do modeling and kind of follow through with that. So the overall EUI for this building is 29, and you can see the end use breakdown on the top right there. And then the other thing, as you saw in the first picture on the slide deck, is that we have a very large PV array, and then I've got a slide coming up where I'll talk about how all these systems tie together. But it's really about kind of keeping an eye on this, and like Len said, few minutes ago, we didn't consider the freeze protection heater for the stormwater cistern, and we had to add that back later towards the end when we discovered that. So those are all things which can trip you up, and it's really important to have that communication with the team. And the other thing which is a lesson learned and also important for these projects is that you have to pay attention to when you're getting submittals for equipment which uses energy, because very often the system may perform, it may move the same amount of air and get it out there, but it may be of a different horsepower. So the devil lies in the details, and it's you're constantly kind of adjusting your energy model and updating it with the changes, and you're doing that not just during the design process but also during the construction process to kind of respond to certain things. So it's really important. We've been measuring the performance of the building over the last several months, and I'm happy to report that we're actually doing better. The interesting part is we've actually done better in the winter time, especially even with these cold winters over the last few months, than we did in the summer. In the summer, we had a little bit of an overage, but in the winter, we were kind of doing much better. And that's a testament to the really robust building envelope. So we'll switch to the next slide, start talking about some of those things here.
Sachin, I thought I'd just mention also that, a lot of this relied on the modeling required us to really understand how the user was going to use the building, the hours of use, the intensity of use, and really get everybody on the same page. I know that there are systems that are bigger than sort of plug loads, but it's really important to message and get a meeting in the minds of how the building's going to be used so that we, accommodate that those loads and that energy use accordingly.
Correct. And no, excellent point, Todd. And the other thing is, once so we had meetings with the users, but also once the building was built, we went back and had meetings with the faculty, with groups of faculty to kind of educate them. Very often, what do we do in our industry? As designers, we design, the constructors build the building, and we do some commissioning, and that's great. But then we turn over the keys to the users, and we walk away, and we hope that the building's going to perform. That if you really want to have a sustainable building, you have to maintain that engagement, and do that. So moving on here, the most important piece of the energy efficiency for this building is really its building envelope. Now we've gone through 2 winters, really cold winters, and we know how the building performs. Last year, when we had the really cold spell in almost single-digit temperature, the building lost power for 48 hours because ComEd's transformer had a problem, and the temperature never dropped below the low 60s in the building. So that tells you a lot about what a really good building envelope can do, and is key to maintaining the energy efficiency, and then to kind of supporting that building envelope is some of the systems we have. We've got a geothermal source, which Len referred to. We have 50 geothermal wells, which make hot water and chill water, and we deliver those through the radiant systems. That's that second picture from the bottom left. You'll see the radiant tubing, which is in the floor slab, and it's everywhere in the building, and that's how we deliver the heating and the cooling, actually. And then the picture in the middle of that air handling unit on the roof, that's how we get our fresh air and dehumidification. And again, if you notice the curb there, I'd call Len the curb czar. Talk about insulating it and making sure that was a lesson learned, that you have to pay attention to this detail. You're designing this really robust building envelope, and your weak point is the curb and how that duct kind of enters into the building. So that was a lesson learned. We had to go back and kind of think through that with Len's help during the submittal and the construction process. And then lastly, another piece which you see on the top left image there is the building actually has a full food service component. So they're actually cooking the meals, not just, it's not just a warming kitchen, it's a full food service operation. So one of the early ideas which we came up with is those two water heaters, which actually sit out in the open fairly close to the kitchen hood. So we're using the heat, those are heat pump based water heaters. We're actually using the heat from the cooking process to making hot water for the building. So it's a really low tech, real easy way of getting that efficiency and improving, our efficiency as it relates to generating hot water for a food service operation.
Okay, the other things on the envelope learned are, as Sachin said, there's a lot more holes in the building than you think. This had an air tightness target that was pretty robust, and there's just holes everywhere. There's security cameras. There's like 4 holes for the water service and the standpipe, and like it's like all these big holes where the Todd, that we had to come in with the for the fire. The foundation insulation. Okay, key thing about a high performance building is you have to insulate the entire foundation. It gets trashed. I mean, this insulation gets installed day one. That's great, but then like by the time you're like done with all your site work, it's like totally trashed. So we have to have a better way of installing the foundation insulation and protecting it. And I think insulation wise, Power did a great job. I mean, Steve Black, and he was on it. And next slide. We had a very robust air barrier. It could take a lot of abuse. I have some pictures of like this stuff banged up and they could seal it. So we're pretty good. We probably could have spent a little bit more time analyzing the wall R value, and maybe we went a little bit overboard, but we weren't sure because we knew we had to hit 0. So we have a pretty involved 8 inches of insulation, which involved the Cascadia clip and then like another piece of metal. And if we had maybe gone to 6 inches, we could have just used the Cascadia clip and saved us a little bit of stress. But they needed it for the subframing to get it all square. The other piece on this, on the energy pedal, just so you know, that's where LBC puts all the embodied carbon. So in addition to all this, we did an embodied carbon study against the baseline. There are some offsets to offset the embodied carbon, and that was pretty straightforward. But the data for embodied carbon is like all over the place. We had to we used a little bit of Athena, we used a little bit of the people from Washington Carbon Leadership Forum. So we kind of like mushed it together. It's kind of like LEED. You just sort of do what you can because the information is not like 100% there. But we didn't use anything like Tally where we sort of took the building. It was a very manual process of looking at the elevations, doing square footage takeoffs, and I've never met a spreadsheet that I didn't love. So it worked out spreadsheet wise. Next slide. And then Sachin, we got to talk about decoupling real quick, decoupling the space conditioning from the ventilation.
Yeah, so I think this is a good slide for that. So this kind of, we put this graphic together after the project was complete, actually, to kind of start to explain how all of the systems work together. And you've heard me talk about some of this. So I think what Len just said is we've got the geothermal source and we deliver it. You heard me talk earlier. We deliver it using the radiant heating and cooling. And then the ventilation is decoupled from the heating and cooling. So what that does is that makes the ductwork smaller, and we use the water to delivering heating and cooling into the space, which is more efficient. And the other thing I want to point out is we do not have the building is all electric, no fossil fuels, and we do not have any backup electric or in any other kind of backup for the geothermal. So we're 100% heating and cooling on the geothermal. The only thing we have here is, if you see in that image where the cars are on that cartoon, we have, I, for some reason, early on started calling it a reverse snow melt, and everybody thought we had a snow melt in the parking lot, and that wasn't the case. What that is like a solar thermal system, which helps us charge our geothermal and improve the coefficient of performance of the geothermal. It's tied into the geothermal. So on a day like today, if that parking lot warms up because the sun's hitting it, that water in those tubes could be 70, 80 degrees, and we could inject that into the geothermal loop, which would improve the efficiency of the heat pump. So that's kind of part of it. The other thing the building has is a PV system, which is north of a 0.5 megawatt. Part of it is ground mounted, part of it is roof mounted, and then we have a battery energy storage system. So one of the lessons learned with the battery energy storage system is, there aren't a whole lot of providers who do battery energy storage systems for commercial and industrial for commercial buildings. You either have folks who do utility scale or on the industrial side much larger, or people who do single family homes, small residential. So that in between place. So it took us a while to kind of narrowing that down and getting some bids and kind of working our way through that. And I wish we would have had those folks early on the team that would have helped with the integration. So there's some lessons learned, but overall, it's key to kind of looking at this. Also, we have over 80 electric meters in the building. So part of the reason for that is we wanted to make sure that, because what are the odds that when the building is built and you turn it on, that it's going to be net zero on day one? I think those odds are zero from my perspective. You have to work at it. Power and their subs did a phenomenal job. We had a really good controls contractor for the building automation system. IntelliBuildings, they did a phenomenal job of working through this, and they're kind of the glue which holds a lot of how the systems work together. So with those meters, when something is not working right, or we can see and break down the energy use in a more granular way and inform how we want to tweak it. For example, we wanted to tweak how the schedules were set on some of the pieces of equipment, when they come on, when they go off, things like that. So that was really key. Another lesson learned is on the geothermal heat pumps. This is our, I think, 4th or 5th project now. I think that technology is still evolving. They're very finicky with the flow and the pressure. So if you're a mechanical engineer designing those, pay special attention to that early on. We've done a couple of projects. We had some lessons learned from those before this one, and then we had a couple more lessons learned here. And I don't want to get into the weeds of that, but it's important to kind of get that. Otherwise, you're going to have these nuisance trips, and everybody then starts to blame the geothermal system rather than how the flow and the system is working. So key things to remember, as if you design a water-to-water geothermal system. Next slide.
Okay, so now we jump
yeah.
into the interiors, and a couple lessons here are daylighting is really hard. And views are really hard to balance all that, as well as envelope, right? I mean, as Todd knows, the original building was a long, skinny building, tons of daylight, tons of surface area, and it's just like, it wasn't going to meet our energy thing. We wanted to, if you notice, it's a very compact shape. I mean, it's a very compact shape, yet deep floor plates. We had to introduce skylights, which are great. But is skylights really a view in the sort of very prescriptive? LBC has like a 30 feet from a window, like that's their gig, right? And like that's great if your building is 60 feet wide, but not if it's 120 feet wide. So we're sort of negotiating with LBC on like a skylight does provide, and the daylight. Trust me, the daylight is great in this building. So views are hard, and you got to start early because once you're there, you can't change it. So, this is from Light Stanza, great program, totally the way to go. The materials, pretty straightforward. CDPH, tons of materials available, not that difficult for people to comply with. Just have it in your specs. So that was pretty straightforward. And then AGC is very involved. So we had an operations plan, green cleaning chemicals, pretty straightforward stuff. Next slide.
Len, I want to go back and talk a little bit about the daylighting. I think one of the things which sometimes people tend to look at these high performance buildings and say, oh, you don't have, your window to wall ratio is too low. And it's going to make the building dark and dingy on the inside. And I think this is where modeling comes in handy. And also, if some of the leadership from the Academy for Global Citizenship, they're not here, and some of the faculty, and we've gone back and talked to them. It's very refreshing to hear them kind of validate this modeling and say, they feel that the space has good daylighting and is well lit. So just because the window to wall ratios are measured and placed appropriately based on the modeling and the design and the architectural design, that's really key to it. I think this notion that you have to have 50 or 70% window to wall ratio to making the building be open and have good daylight is not necessarily true.
Right. There is a lot of transparency, and we have some more photos of the inside looking out, and you'll see. So I think in the next 2 slides. So the other piece to living building is to have sort of a monitoring system or testing. And very early on, we said, no, there's no way we can test the building, because guaranteed, once the people use it, all the formaldehyde levels and the VOCs are going to just, because of all the clothing and the perfume. So we decided to put in a reset system. However, we didn't hire the reset person early enough, and we have to add some sensors. So if you're doing a reset system, you got to get them super early, because there's all these parameters about how big a room can be versus the sensor. So basically it's just number of sensors. And, we came out, I'm going to say we came up short because we didn't engage those guys. Like the battery guy, we didn't engage, in this case it's the girl, but we didn't engage the reset person early enough. And we're chasing our tail on that. So get people involved early, because this is really complicated. But other than that, we do have the sensors we do have are measuring, they're working, they're integrated with the building management system. And sometimes it's providing too much information. So, the Paul's like, whoa, what's going on? And, it's a school, right? People are bringing, it does exactly what you would expect. In the morning, the VOCs go way up, right? And then the ventilation system starts filtering and things drop down. So it's doing exactly what it is. Next slide. So here's some shots of the interior. And then we had to punch some holes in some walls to get that interior space, those interior spaces out. I mean, the school doesn't have a lot of like actual walls. You can see the plan. There's kind of like spidery, fingery things. And there are some, some quiet zones, but it's sort of a very open plan sort of kind of scheme, but there are some dark spaces, so we had to punch some holes in so you could see the views. And we located windows, in a playful way, up and down to get our daylighting. But yeah, on a sunny day, it's like great. Next slide. All right, so within the LBC, there's the dreaded materials pedal, and I'm going to say dreaded because it is the dreaded materials pedal. Luckily, you can skip imperative 12 and go right to 13, 14, 15, and 16. So in the materials pedal, it's as everyone on the call knows, it's the red list, right? And there's the pesky chemicals, and they're everywhere. And what would I do different? Boy, a lot more research ahead of time, and a lot more contractor training. We kind of, Power was on board with this. I mean, they knew what they were getting into. It's not like they were like blindsided, but I think that they didn't know the level of detail that they needed to get to, and particularly the level of detail from the manufacturer, right? Like this is the key, right? Like, so I'll talk to Power. Power's going to talk to AMS. AMS is going to talk to Bornquist, and Bornquist is going to talk to Kinetics. Okay, the person we need to talk to is the guy at Kinetics, and not even the person. I got to talk to some like tech at Kinetics, like who's working in the factory, or some engineer, right? But just to get that email chain, that's like 7 emails to find the person at Kinetics that can tell me about these are isolation bases. They keep the pumps, from shaking the building apart. And so I don't think anyone realized that we had to go that far down the food chain, or I guess everyone thought maybe, oh, well, AMS will have this, or maybe not. But yeah, going down that food chain was like super stressful, because no one was really used to it. And also we're asking for information. We're asking for information that people aren't really used to. I mean, we can pick out drywall all day long. I mean, there's a relatively short supply chain between us and the drywall manufacturer, but on some of this mechanical stuff, it's like really tough. And then the light fixtures, the lesson learned on the light fixtures was we had to choose between efficient light fixtures or light fixtures that were redless free. And we were hitting this, we were up against our energy target. So we sort of had to look each other in the eye and say, well, what do you guys want to do? We either are going to use more energy and get the redless free light fixtures, or we're going to use the more efficient light fixtures and deal with the stress of having some non-compliant or unknown, let's just say unknown materials on the light fixtures.
Let me add one thing, Len, if it's okay.
Sure.
This also is, this received quite an array of funding, and a lot of it was public funding. So competitive, multiple manufacturers and procurement, a multiple manufacturer procurement process was necessary. That also added to the complexity. So there's some materials that we listed that we had to vet deeper than others, because we had to have 2 or 3 manufacturers per product. So if we could single source, that would make things a lot easier, but not, we couldn't do that. That wasn't an option to us. So it's something to be mindful if you are looking at a project with public procurement requirements. Be aware.
Next slide. So the biggest thing on the responsible sourcing was living building products. There's just not a lot on the market. So we sort of had to kind of, make it work, because you have to have 3. And then the wood. So FSC wood, easy. Kind of make a choice, FSC wood from Oregon or, non-FSC wood from Wisconsin because it's closer. And then all the furniture. And because of the complicated procurement path, furniture was bought by a separate vendor and they were European. And so we had to, so not all wood in the world is created equal. And so you really just have to get familiar that there's low risk wood and then there's FSC wood, and that low risk wood is good, but it takes some work. And so all the playground equipment is invasive species, but we had to call a guy in Wisconsin. I had to get all this information about how he actually selectively harvests the black locust, and document all this. And had I known, I would have driven up to Wisconsin and taken a bunch of photographs of him harvesting the trees. But at the time I didn't know. The same with the furniture is, there's a European furniture standard that we didn't know about that makes it low risk. So our wood is blended between legit FSC wood and what they consider low risk wood. So you have more wood in a building than you think you do, even though the building is mostly steel. All right, next slide. This was pretty straightforward. Where's stuff from? This was super easy. There's no issues on, most I forget the number, but we're well within the 20%, 30%, and 25% for regional. But we're in Chicago, so it's super easy, right? I think if we were in Guam or Maine, it might be a little difficult. Next. And then the waste, the net positive waste was pretty straightforward. Power, knows how to do the waste management. We laid that out early. They had the rules. They had the dumpsters. You can see the multiple dumpsters out there. This was pretty straightforward. I have to say, recycling XPS is not, and EPS is not the easiest in the world. So that was a little bit of a what are we going to do with this? So we're that was a kind of a, had I known, we would have been more dogmatic with the XPS and the polyiso. We were really fortunate that we were able to use crushed concrete. There's tons of it in Chicago, so that counted to our net positive waste. And then there were trees that we used Oregon lumber to mill new wood. So all the benches are from site harvested trees. So next. We're getting to the hour. I want to burn through to the end, so we have time for questions. The last 2 petals are equity, and a lot of this is about. Well, Todd, you can talk about universal access. You wrote the letter.
Hey, I'll be quick. I know there's probably questions. Universal design principles were incorporated into the design to the greatest extent possible to maximize usage by different age groups, regardless of physical abilities. We incorporated the first gender-neutral toilets into this facility. For students and staff, age-appropriate teaching kitchens within each learning village that was also had full access for people with disabilities. uniform work surfaces where we could get a constant, accessible counter that also worked for able-bodied folks. That was, we always looked for those opportunities, as well as seating areas incorporating companion seating throughout the building.
Now on the equity pedal, yeah, you
I-
can talk about this
I
with
guess
Aaron.
I guess I keep rolling.
Go.
As another example, universal access, we bermed earth up against the gymnasium. That's what you're looking at in the foreground. This is really a continuation of the prior slide, but this gets the kids out of the building faster from the second floor. It provides additional play space with a wide range of programmatic opportunity, and it's fully accessible. So that serpentine walk is actually accessible. Imperative 18 inclusion. As part of the land acquisition from CHA, AGC signed a MOU that ensured that current and past community members were brought into the planning process and provided opportunity in the workplace. So it increased, created 26% minority and 5% women-owned business participation on the aggregate, as well as 50% Chicago resident participation in Section 3 resident hires as well. The workforce development was managed by consultants that assisted the public outreach and facilitated local hiring, meetings and outreach to exceed the aspirational goals and requirements.
So the lesson learned here is if you want to pursue this, you need to be really on the contracts, because a lot of this Power and the consultant managed a lot of these workforce contracts. And it's just a lot. It's like something way outside most architecture realms. And it's like super important. And you can't do it unless you do it up front, because you can't catch this stuff at the end. This is all early groundwork that you have to do to sort of achieve this equity and inclusion pedal. So credit to Urban Resolve for sort of helping shepherd that all through. Next slide. This is my favorite slide. This is the biophilic slide. Oh, Angel, you get to go on this one. Okay. You can talk about my favorite slide.
Well, you definitely, well, no, if it's your favorite, go ahead. Because the matrix is, it's an example of what we showed earlier, how light gets to each space, and it's kind of just a graph, another way of graphically showing that. I would say from our perspective, we have a large atrium, kind of entry vestibule that serves, it's a greenhouse that serves kind of the entryway, but also flanked by a program of the villages, the villages are the student learning centers, there's the classrooms. So that just allowed us to kind of get that light further in into the building. As we mentioned, there's a deep floor plate. But
yeah, and this is the test that we did continually. As we designed the building, this is the terrapin green, the 14 principles of biophilia, which is totally cool. And we broke all the sites down and rated how are we doing, and you can see the red spots. And then we're like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, Angel, what can we do? Todd, we got to do something. These are red, and we can, you can have some reds. But these 14 principles are like totally great for a school, and everybody should go through these on their projects and break your programmatic space down. So yeah, credit to Terrapin Green. And next slide, we're almost done for questions.
So last slide, like, it's just a lot about one principle I think about LBC is transparency. So education and inspiration, just like today, we're giving the talk. We've done this talk to the teachers, the students. We're continuing to do tours. The school provides that mission as well. They're on board. It's just a testament to not only LBC, we're providing insight to the building, but everyone has bought into this goal. So there's a lot of buy-in from not only the ownership and the contractor, but this team as well. And so yeah, we just like to do that. And then we have the graphics to support that as well. So we're continuing to get that messaging out, and that message is displayed throughout the school in the graphics. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I think we could have engaged the graphics person earlier too. I think, we're architects, so we speak this all the time, and graphics people, they have to interview you because they're graphics people. And so you're trying to translate stuff like geothermal heat pump into something that people can understand. And there's a lot of back and forth that has to happen so you can translate that into something that can become a graphic that can be used for kindergartners as well as eighth graders as well as adults. And it graphics happen at the end, so you think that happens at the end, but no, you probably should integrate it a little bit earlier so you can have those conversations. I mean, we put windows into the mechanical systems. As Sachin said, the air hot water heaters are in the spaces, so the building is all very visible. But from an architect and engineer's eyes, it's like obvious. Oh, that's a water heater. But I don't know. Maybe most people are like, well, what is that? Or the fancy hood. They don't know how fancy that hood is. That's a crazy fancy hood over the kitchen. So
I would add that like the technology that we have to collect the BAS collecting this data, one thing that we kind of came across is how that output, how we can get that data. It's coded, each mechanism is coded each way, and then there's nobody who can then output that data into a display screen. There's kind of that gap because that no one's really asking for that right now. So we're kind of going through that heartache as well, is trying to get this information out back to the students, and they can kind of graphically see, how the building's performing. Even though we have the data, we just doesn't have anybody to make those into a graphic. Is kind of what Len was into.
And the ultimate goal for some of that is educational teaching tool, and also to gamify energy savings. How can we encourage the students to not only learn about how their building works, but also try to compete with one another on measures to save energy on a month-by-month basis. So that's where we're heading, or trying to head anyway.
okay, questions. I guess Miranda, are you the question keeper?
Yes. Awesome. Thank you all so much. I am going to start at the top in the Q&A function. Someone asked, please describe how important was aggressively targeting the embodied carbon of the building and those goals?
It's only important because you have to pay for it, right? You have to pay for a carbon offset for your embodied carbon. And, I'm going to say that carbon is a lot cheaper than it probably should be. So, that's not a big stick, right? I mean, we want to reduce embodied carbon because it's the right thing to do, not because we're buying offsets. So it was important, but it wasn't the prime driver on this. I mean, we did look at the insulation, and we used mineral wool on purpose because it doesn't have the refrigerants. We would have loved to use it on the roof, but polyiso is sort of the go-to product, and we did have a budget, and so we had to make some choices. But yeah, it wasn't I don't think it was a prime driver.
Where did your embodied carbon offsets primarily come from?
Oh, Green E. I can come back to you. I have it up. I can tell you.
I missed the source of drinking water. Where is it obtained?
Lake Michigan. The city wouldn't let us use the drinking water, even though we have a filtration system that brings it to the drinking level quality per the state. They wouldn't let us use it in the faucets, so it comes from Lake Michigan. We are piped for it though, so we're ready, and we're piped to send it to the farm. We're also ready there. There's like a pipe with a little gap, a little teeny gap. So it's like a 10-minute operation to put a piece of pipe in once we get approvals.
That's great. How did you address security and acoustics with the open learning areas?
Oh, I'll take that one. We recognized pretty early on by bringing in our acoustical consultant that we were going to be in for a ride. Educational spaces are notoriously fickle with, learning and intelligibility, speech intelligibility. So we knew with all the hard surfaces and so forth, we're going to have a challenge. We had to set some priorities and set some guardrails out. So we recognized right away that we need the hard surface floors to get that radiant heating and cooling, and to get that heat transfer and cool transfer to the spaces. So it wasn't really an option to cover it with the normal resilient materials or carpeting or something along those lines. we have the exposed concrete. So right there, we got a hard surface. And the ceilings, we looked at a spray acoustical insulation. So we tried different strategies of absorption, understanding that at the end, we were going to have to troubleshoot some areas that were identified as problem. Surprisingly, we don't have that many areas that are problematic. We do have a couple, no, but we kind of went into this eyes wide open. I think the acoustical consultant, bless their heart, but they were ready to jump out of their own skin because they have these very, very strict rules of what they want for absorptive materials, and and so we said, look, we're going to take you out of your comfort zone, but it's going to be okay. We'll walk down this road together with the client. And if we identify areas of use, we'll do a little more enhanced treatment. So other strategies were, acoustical clouds and other absorptive strategies like panels on some of the walls.
Do you have any feedback on the security question? How is that handled, or anything there?
Security. Okay, so they have a big driver to get the kids out of the building. So we did come up with this pinwheel plan with the access points at the cardinal coordinates, but they do station it for pickups and drop-offs to come certain hours to certain entrances and exits, not unlike a lot of public schools. But there's nothing else that's really particularly fancy with regard to the security systems. It's just your normal cameras, your sensors, and things of that nature, and then good old staffing as needed to support those the plans.
Great. The classic question, what is the cost of the development and operations compared to traditional?
I'm going to put out a rough number. Costs since the pandemic have just been really difficult for me to keep my arms around. But at the same time that this building was being built, we were working on a Chicago public school. The Chicago Public School was coming out at around $350 a square foot. And if I remember correctly, and Len, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this came in at around 560 a foot. Does that sound about right?
A little less. I mean, I
A
think,
little less?
are you including, this also, it's a little bit less. And we don't know if if that other school, the site costs.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
exactly sure. So I'm not going to go as high as 560, but this also has this is net zero, and it's got a battery, a big battery. So there's some pretty expensive elements. When you take those out, you're starting to get to, not the same price, but you're getting to something manageable. I mean, the PV array and the battery alone are a couple million.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, site development costs here were more significant than they would typically be on a more conventional school project, I would say.
So we're trying to still unpack that to get a real defendable answer.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel the schedules for the phasing of the project, design, bidding, CA, etc., was appropriate, or would you think that Living Building Challenge type projects need a further review as far as timelines?
We probably could have done some more work at the end of design development, I think, probably with a better assessment of materials. I think we underestimated the amount of work it would take for materials, and I think at design development we could have done a little bit more of a introspective about what was going to drive it. But in order to do that, we need costs. So everything's cost based, and so at DD we sort of had costs, but not really. And you'd be surprised how difficult it was just to get the cost of materials from the contractor. I mean, because it goes down to, the light switches. How much do the light switches cost? I mean, it's crazy, right? So we didn't have that at DD, so you don't really know. And so you need to make decisions, and you have imperfect information. So, but I would have loved a little bit more time in DD to sort of dig into that. And
I
so
agree
we
with
could have
that.
saved some time at the back end, instead of chasing, we would have been able to focus on the big ticket items.
Another big suggestion that I would have, and it might be obvious to all of you, is get a consultant on board to help you do the red list vetting who has some established database started. So you're not starting from literally ground zero. So what we did was we sort of looked at the normal menu of materials that we would ordinarily want to use. And then we went through what's on the list that's already been vetted, pre-vetted on a prior project at some point. It's, some firms have more extensive databases than others, but that was a big leg up to get at least, say, 40% of the products we could tell we were in the right zone.
The other thing on the schedule side, I think on a building like this, you have to plan for things like the blower door test and then also all of the equipment commissioning and startup and kind of tweaking and adjusting it and training for the owner. It's not necessarily, I mean, what we do on standard projects, I mean, from my perspective, we hardly do any of that on standard projects. There's no scope or time built for that in any of the parties, and I think that is key to the success of a building like this.
Mhm, mhm. Awesome. Well, we are 1 minute over, which is fantastic. Thank you all so much to our speakers. This is a fantastic and information-packed presentation. Thank you all for our attendees for coming and listening in. And I will see you all later. Have a
Oh,
great Thursday.
They were Vera. The climate of the offsets were from Vera International. So Carbon Solution Groups, and then they bought them from Vera.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
All right.